I now bring in Dave Ehrenberg, a state attorney for Palm Beach County, and Patricia Hurtado, legal reporter for Bloomberg News. She has been in the courtroom for Trump's trial. So, Dave, first to you, what are your thoughts on Stormy Daniels' first interview here since the verdict? And what does she want? What do you think she wants? Why do you think she wants her voice to be heard in this way, given the fact that she, wore a bulletproof vest to when she was testifying? She's talked about sort of how scary all of this has been for her. What do you make of the fact that she's speaking out?
It means she wants vindication, and she got it, because if the jury did not believe her, they would not have found Trump guilty, because Todd Blanche, I thought, made a crucial error. He did what Trump apparently told him to do, which was deny the affair entirely. He should have just acknowledged the affair. By denying the affair, it allowed Stormy Daniels to tell her story in great detail. I mean, perhaps in too much detail. But now she wants vindication, because she's had to walk around, as you say correctly, with bulletproof vests. She's had endless supplies of death threats, and she just wants the world to know that she has been telling the truth all along, and the jury validated that.
It's really interesting you say she wants to be, really wants to be validated here. I wonder, do you think Stormy Daniels, what she's saying, that it could have any sort of risk for the appeals process here?
I don't think her statements will jeopardize the appeal in any way. I think Donald Trump's statements have more of an effect upon the appeal. I think Donald Trump's statements actually have a bigger effect on his sentencing. The longer he continues to be defiant, to continue to lie about what happened with Stormy Daniels, to insult the judge and the prosecutors, even though he's allowed to do so under the gag order, but the person who's going to make up the decision on the penalty will be the guy wearing the black robe who Trump continues to insult. He's a human being like everyone else, and he may just lay the smackdown on him if Trump continues to run his mouth.
Yeah. Patricia, I also, you were there as Stormy Daniels sat less than 10 feet away from Donald Trump. She told the Mirror, that British tabloid, it was intimidating with the jurors looking at her, saying she wanted to come out and prove that she had been telling the truth the entire time. She added, quote, "It's not over for me. It's never going to be over for me. Trump may be guilty, but I still have to live with the legacy." What struck you most about her testimony, and what do you think resonated with the juries?
Well, she obviously seemed extremely nervous when she first started testifying, extremely anxious. She almost rolled out her story in a harried fashion, and it was almost burbling out of her. But on the second day, when she was testifying and on cross, she really held her own. And that's when I thought she showed her true mettle, because she was able to show that, hey, you know what, just because you're Donald Trump's lawyer, I'm not intimidated. And she really answered back to Susan Nichols, who was Trump's defense lawyer, who was cross-examining her. And at one point, she was accused of making money off Donald Trump. And she said, not unlike your client, who's selling gold shoes. So, I mean, she gave as good as she got. And, I mean, I think one thing we're forgetting here in the sentencing issue is Judge Merchan did issue a gag order, but he's also going to impose the sentence upon Donald Trump. And we haven't seen any expressions of remorse from the defendant, let alone any humility. And in fact, he called the judge a devil the other day. So these are the kind of comments that Merchan may take into account. He's a former prosecutor. He has to impose the rule of law and show that he's doing it fairly and evenly, not just somebody who's running for re-election. I think that's going to factor in greatly in his consideration.
Well, as you talk about what Donald Trump has said, Dave, I want to play for you some of what Donald Trump said on Friday about Stormy Daniels without actually saying her name. Let's watch that.
With these people, they were able to use people salacious. By the way, and nothing ever happened. There was no anything. Nothing ever happened, and they know it. But they were as salacious as they could be. And it had nothing to do with the case, but it had to do with politics. And do you notice the timing? The timing was perfect.
A reminder there that while Trump is claiming falsely that this is all connected to Democrats, there's no evidence of that. But I want to say, and I want to ask you in particular, Dave, does the unanimous guilty verdict here, does it say that the jurors accepted Stormy Daniels' claims and that they believed her in their fact-finding mission here?
Yes, it does, as well as Michael Cohen as well. Trump had every opportunity to cross-examine both of them, and his lawyers failed. I don't think he benefits by continuing to deny a story that even his supporters have to acknowledge. I mean, come on. I mean, he should have just acknowledged it. He should have just moved on, and then he could have avoided all the dirty details at trial. Now, I will say this, on appeal, Trump's lawyers will be able to complain about the fact that Judge Merchan allowed so many dirty details of the encounter between Daniels and Trump. I mean, some of the stuff we heard was TMI, and an appellate court could decide that it was too prejudicial. So that is a legitimate grounds on appeal. But remember, Trump's lawyers opened the door to it by denying the encounter ever existed, hence the details.
Yeah, definitely details that had us all cringing a bit there. Now, Patricia, I want to ask you about what Donald Trump is doing now, which is saying that he's okay with house arrest or jail time if that's part of his sentence. What factors do you think are on the table when Judge Merchan goes to hold that July 11th sentencing hearing? And can any of Trump's post-verdict behavior influence that sentencing, do you think?
I think it can. I mean, Judge has a lot of leeway under the law. It's 1 1/3 to 4 years. He could string them together and make it a maximum of 4 years. He could give a range. He could impose part-time, maybe 6 months, and home detention. Legal experts have said to me he could fashion something very creative. You do nights in jail or at Rikers Island even. But they also said that there really is important and it's important for Merchan to show that he's not going to treat Donald Trump differently than any other defendant. We have to remember that Merchan presided over Allen Weisselberg, the Trump longtime CFO, Allen Weisselberg, who was convicted of 15 counts of tax fraud, a much more serious crime, and he got 5 months in jail at Rikers Island. So that, and he said to him, I take white collar crime very seriously. Donald Trump has been convicted of 34 felonies. So it's many more crimes. And you have the judge dealing with somebody who's so, Donald Trump is put himself out there as I'm running for president and I'm right and everyone's wrong. So I think the judge has to consider he has to treat him as fairly as he would any other defendant, including white, brown, or purple. That Donald Trump isn't special. He has to be treated the same way other people would be treated.
Well, Dave, as Patricia's saying that the judge really needs to show that she's treating Donald Trump fairly, Donald Trump's lawyer now, we played for folks saying that he might not face any sentencing at all. Is that because of the appeals process? What exactly is the lawyer saying there? How do you understand that?
Well, Trump may never serve any time because as soon as his sentencing happens, his lawyers are going to appeal it, and that appeal could take years. So even if he does get jail time, he's not going to be wearing an orange jumpsuit anytime soon because this is going to be on appeal. I think Trump is in some trouble, though, because he's been insulting this judge so much. So there's every reason why the judge could lay the hammer down. But why should we expect that when Trump has already violated his gag order 10 times and Judge Merchan, an experienced, respected judge, has refused to treat him like any other defendant, giving him better treatment by avoiding incarceration, avoiding a serious sanction. So that's why I think that when it comes down to the sentencing, even though Judge Merchan has every reason to sanction him, to send him to jail, I think he avoids doing that. I think probation or even house arrest is the most likely course of action here.
And Dave, you just talked about the appeals process. I'm sitting here in Washington, D.C., just a couple blocks away from the Supreme Court. Is there any path for the Trump defense team to take this case to the Supreme Court?
Yeah, I think so, because they could say that a state prosecutor cannot lean on federal campaign finance law to elevate a state misdemeanor to a state felony. That would be a violation of due process, perhaps in wrongful interpretation of the federal law, the campaign finance law, how they applied it in this case. So that is the hook for the U.S. Supreme Court to get involved. So Speaker Johnson could get his wish. Eventually, his favorite justices, Justice Alito and Justice Clarence Thomas, may end up weighing in on this case after all.
And Patricia, I want to ask you, do you think Stormy Daniels will show up to the sentencing?
It's very possible. I mean, look, the poor woman has been assailed and barbecued by the defense for years. And, she finally got her due. Same with Michael Cohen. So, I mean, they're perfectly entitled as, if you want to call them or view them ostensibly as victims of this crime. They are the people that were vilified, and now they get to be in court and see what happens to Donald Trump as a result of this. I just wanted to add in, you can't, under New York state law, start an appeal until after sentencing. So Trump will have to wait till July 11th if he gets sentenced on July 11th. And the other thing that has to happen, he can start playing out his appeal in appellate court in Manhattan, then to New York's highest court of appeals, and then he could go to the Supreme Court. One thing that Merchan and prosecutors have in their favor is a federal judge, Alvin Hellerstein, last year upheld the prosecution of the state prosecution of Donald Trump. And he issued a 65-page ruling laying out all the parameters of why this could be viewed as the state had authority. So prosecutors have that as an advantage.
Yeah, well, great context there. Thank you, both of you, Dave, Patricia. I appreciate you coming on.